There are very few folks in the world that are truly, really good listeners. If we can be that person for our kids, you'll always have a spot in their roster.
Welcome to the Dynamist podcast this week, guys. We are interviewing and talking to a good buddy of mine who I got connected to through, surprise, surprise, the GoBundance network. That network is such a fruitful source for me, and I meet so many influential people and impactful people that really help shape and guide my life. And I met Thomas, our guest today, the founder and CEO of Dads Who Lead, at a weekend mastermind retreat, and we really just bonded. The first time he had any interaction with me, I sat in a circle of men I had never met before, and it was my turn to just talk about what I was working on, my financial fitness, my goals. What ended up happening is, in a room full of men I've never met, I just sat in the circle and cried because I felt like I was sacrificing so much of my time, and I really value my relationships with my family, my kids, my wife. And I talked about how I just felt really out of balance. And that really resonated with Thomas. And on a break, he walked up to me. We sparked off a conversation and we became friends ever since. And since then, I've worked with Thomas on some coaching. I've attended some of his retreats, and he's got a really cool company called Dads Who Lead. And it's really helpful. And I think it can be really helpful not only to you if you are a father, but to parents as a whole. And I think where our nation is heading, the direction our nation is heading, this is a huge void. It's a huge void. And I think that, getting back to the principles and the foundation of these things that Thomas preaches, the drum he beats, could be really, really helpful to the future of our country. And I just wanted to bring him on and share his message and talk about things that we believe are important to the direction and the future of this nation that we love. So, Thomas, welcome to the studio this week, my man.
Man, thank you, Tim. It's an honor. Appreciate the warm introduction.
Absolutely. For everybody who doesn't know you, who's never heard of you before, or Dads Who Lead, tell us what Dads Who Lead is, and then give us the origin story. How did this whole thing start? Because I think that story is so powerful.
Absolutely. Dads Who Lead is about accomplishing one thing, one North Star, and that is for us as dads to become revered and trusted leaders within our home, which is a very high standard to move towards. But that's the caliber of folks that I like to work with, the folks that aren't afraid to back down from high expectations and challenge. So as far as the origin story, I have a 15-year-old son, and he was born when I was 18 years old. I'm not still with his mom. His mom and I actually haven't been together since he's been born. And that's been its own set of challenges, especially if you've gone through a split family. But she moved to Central Oregon. And initially when she moved, my son wanted to stay in Eugene with me. And after about 9 months, I got to a point in my relationship with Charles that he was like, Dad, I'm done. I want out. I feel controlled. I'm not able to do what I want to do. I'd rather go live with mom, even though my friends are here in Eugene. And here I was, a dad running a father-son retreat program. It wasn't Dads Who Lead yet. And his own son had just walked out of his life. And so I had to really reflect on, what do I need to do? Who do I need to become to be the leader to guide my son to be successful and have the impact with him that I want? And I wasn't going to accept it is what it is. I had to rewrite that year how I led, how I connected, and how I set expectations. Him moving to Central Oregon, the two things happened. One, we had a court hearing, and it decided that I could have everything that I wanted in my parenting plan if I moved to Central Oregon. So that was the easy part. All right, if I move to Central Oregon, I'll be able to have my kid half-time. The hard part of that was I had to leave my teaching job. So when I left my teaching job, I said, okay, I can restart teaching, or I can go all in on coaching dads full-time and helping them amplify their leadership within their home. It's been a powerful, exciting experience.
You went through a lot of hardship at a young age. You grew up early. What I love about your story is it's authentic and vulnerable. You made some mistakes at a young age, and rather than hiding behind them, you illuminate them, which I love. I relate with people who say, here's me, here's who I am. I'm not perfect. I've made some mistakes. And from these choices, I've grown and compounded and gotten better. Here's what I've learned. Here's what I'm willing to share. And I want to share this journey with you so that you don't have to make the same mistakes I've made or struggle with the same hardships, or hopefully you can learn from my lessons. So I really, really appreciate your authenticity. I love in today's day and age that you are front and center, a dad who is committed to being a great dad. That is like front and center in the household. And why is this so important to all of us? This podcast talks a lot to entrepreneurs reaching the next level, eliminating your limiting beliefs. We talk about financial freedom. We talk about investing and real estate. But at the end of the day, none of that means a damn thing without your family. And I would challenge all of you who are listening to this podcast. Assume that you're a billionaire, okay? That's a lot of money, But you're a billionaire who has no relationship with his kids. You live in isolation. You have deteriorating relationships all across the board. Or worse, some catastrophic tragedy happens. You finally climb the mountain. You've achieved this wealth, and the unthinkable happens, and you lose your family in some unforeseen accident. Was the journey worth it? All that time that you sacrificed, because you keep telling yourself, I'm going to sacrifice and struggle now. I'm going to spend the time now so that later on my kids can appreciate it. And I've learned as a dad myself, kids don't care. They don't care about how much money you make. They don't care about what's in the bank, the car you drive. They care about time spent. And you have a finite amount of time to spend and invest in your most precious asset and resource. And that is your family and the relationships with your kids. And something that I've really learned from you, Thomas, is how to own that and how to nurture and foster those relationships as a man. In society today, it's so often overlooked. There's this weird culture shift where it's not okay to be a masculine male. It's shameful to stand up and be strong and provide for your family and defend your family. And something that I really appreciate you and dads who lead is that you are unapologetically front and center. No, this is how we're going to lead our household. This is how we're going to foster our relationships. And here's why. It's this compounding effect of making every single thing better. So we have a lot to dig into today. Now, aside from that, I just want to commend you on one last thing, because we talk on this podcast a lot about taking risk. Bro, you sacrificed everything that you knew was safe and secure in pursuit of a relationship with your child. You left a secure job with plenty of time off, decent income, and a place you love, and you launched into the unknown of entrepreneurship. And so many men wouldn't do that. I know they wouldn't do that in today's culture because they're scared, because they don't know. What if I fail? How am I going to provide? And I want to just commend you before we dive into this episode and the topics of fatherhood and congratulate you on taking that risk, because you cannot gain without sacrifice. And you put the fear of failure aside, you put all of these unknowns and insecurities aside, and you launched into something that I commend you for. I think if more people put those principles first and took the risk, we'd have a lot stronger society with a way more firm backbone and way less susceptible and vulnerable to being blown all over the place because they don't know who they are and what they're capable of. So I just love hearing that story. I love that you took that leap. And that's one of the things that we initially connected with right off the bat. So I'm stoked. This is going to be a great conversation.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Let's talk about fatherhood. Why is fatherhood and these relationships with our kids so important, especially as we get into the teenage years? Because I have a 12-year-old. He's about to be 13. And there's a shift happening. He's a good kid, very good. You've met him. We just went on a retreat together.
Yeah.
But as a dad and a man who is a male and understands testosterone, here and there, I feel this like rooster puff up. He's strutting around. He wants to set his own boundaries. And I, as a masculine male, as a alpha type A male, have the tendency to just be overly aggressive in reinforcing those boundaries. And you really harp on some really important principles of guidance, of gentle nudging in this transition. And why is it that this time is so important in the relationship, this shift from adolescence to these teenage years? And why is it important for us to maintain and nurture these relationships with our kids?
Yeah. The big thing that I've seen is that from 1 to 10, 1 to 11, kids, we are the coolest people in their life. It's organic from the biologically, they're attached to us because we are their survival. So even if you look at other species, The young are really attached to their parents. They're very connected. And the organic shift in nature is that once kids are starting to hit that teenage years, they want to set their own path and they want to do their own things. And they want us to rebel against leadership or find their own tribe. If they're not rebelling against our tribe as parents, they're still invested in finding their own. And what can happen in that phase if we're not intentional and tactile with the moves that we make as parents? Kids can say, if they don't say it, they're thinking it, fuck this and fuck you. I'm going to do my own thing. And now we're standing there as parents. I guess I don't have a lot of authority anymore over my kids. Either it is what it is, or I'm going to send them to a boarding school or fill in the punishment. And the more we put our kids into a box, the faster and harder they're going to push back against it. So you talked about the gentle nudges and the guiding. It's really about owning who we are as dads and the direction that we're going so that we can be a man worth following for our kids. They're going to take their own path. But the cool thing with our position as dads is if it's done correctly, they'll follow our lead without us having to tell them, take steps A, B, and C.
You're exactly right. You put on music and my other kids are clapping. Let's just say my kids are clapping. I have a 9-month-old. She looks around the room for a while. She's like soaking it all in. And next thing you know, she starts clapping. I didn't work with her on clapping. I didn't teach her to clap, but she's clapping. Why? She's emulating what she sees. I know a lot of what you talk about is when you have this rebellion phase with your kids and they don't want to listen to you anymore, it comes from you. It first comes from looking in the mirror, right? And I forget who wrote this quote, and it says, leaders look in the mirror when there's a problem, and they look out the window when there's times of worthy of praise, something like that. I butchered the quote, but essentially saying if there's a problem, the first thing that they do is they look at themselves. Am I the problem? Am I setting the example? Am I setting the standard, right? If I'm not setting a good example, just even me as an individual, when I was a kid in school or local politicians, I say to myself, is that somebody that I want to emulate or be like? And if the answer is no, I completely disregard what they're telling me instantly. And so as a dad in my household, why would I think that doesn't apply to me also? It's absolutely the first thing that my kids are doing is looking at us as leaders, at the example we're setting, at the lives we live. And if we're not living what we speak, why should they? Right?
Yes.
You have this analogy about ships and sailing. It's so revealing and it's so helpful in this time of mentorship. Would you mind talking about that metaphor?
Yeah, absolutely. I spent some time on boats when I was young. And as men, we're guiding our own ship when we set up. You're 25 years old, you've got your own ship, you're learning how to sail it on your own. And then you welcome a woman on board. Now you have a ship together that you're sailing. And soon you have kids. And those kids are now on your ship for a while. This season of life we're talking about, they start to have their own ship. And they're now going on their own journey. But to be successful as a dad, the first thing we've got to do is make sure that our ship is running well. Because if we're just focusing on what's happening on somebody else's ship, our own is going to crash. So we've got to make sure we're handling our fitness, our finances, our spirituality, everything within ourselves needs to be in a good place so that our ship is ahead and a good guiding point for our kids that are riding alongside us. This is the big difference between being a dad and a leader as a father and being the leader of a company. If you're the leader of a team, everybody's going in the same damn direction. Everybody's on the same boat. As a dad, we have to learn how to lead people when they're on their own boat. And that's a lot of what we talk about, respect and connection. My son's 15. I need to have a high understanding of what's happening on his boat. Where is he going? What are the problems that he's running into? And that's the only way that I'm going to be able to coach and guide him other than keeping my boat in a strong same direction, is that I have to have a connection where he's telling me what's going on. He's telling me the problems that he's running into, and he's telling me where he's going to want to go. And if I have a strong connection, he can lean on me for, hey, I'm seeing the waves doing this up ahead of me. Have you ever seen that before? You have experience with that? This is what I'm thinking about doing, asking questions, telling stories. Those are the moments that are going to help him get to where he wants to go. And it's a big shift for us as parents because we're so used to being in charge and we're so used to like, no, for the family, this is what needs to happen. You need to sign up for this sport, allowing them the freedom to be able to do it. Now, just like anything else, the amount of freedom is going to fluctuate based on their skill level. So they're not going to be able to go off totally on their own away from us. You don't want to be neglectful, but there is a level of freedom as they are successful. How can we continue to guide them and get them more and more on their own and moving on their own path and not the one that we set them towards?
Yeah. And as parents, we should desire for our children to grow on their own and start living their own lives, because what happens if they don't is that they're just going to stay stagnant and they're going to die. They're going to die in our basement doing nothing. And that's just not what we are called to do. We are called to go out into the world and contribute. And our highest calling as men is to raise up children that can make a positive impact in our world, in our communities, and grow into becoming strong leaders and peers and friends and good people. And so they need to be on their own ship. They need to learn how to raise the sails and, I don't know, all your terminology, jig and jib or whatever it is. And the reason that they need to learn how to do that is because one of two things is going to happen. They're going to leave one day on their own, and they're going to sail across the ocean with absolutely no experience. They're going to fail. They're going to sink because they have never, ever done it before, or they're going to live in fear and they're never going to go out on their own ship. And the same thing is going to happen. Either way, they make no impact on the world. And we are called to go make an impact on the world. So it's important. It's important. And there's like this delicate balance of giving them space, but also maintaining the boundaries. I have a really good friend, the secret producer of this podcast. He talks about parenthood a lot. It's one of his like biggest passions. And he thinks of parenting kind of like bowling, where you set the bumpers up in bowling. As a parent, you should set the bumpers up initially. Now, you let your kid roll the ball however they see fit initially. You know, if they want to granny roll it, if they want to throw it like an adult, the ball can bounce off the rails. It can go back and forth. But as parents, it's our job to set the left and right limit. Like, let them meander and explore and find themselves in that lane. As parents, our job isn't to micromanage and say, set up like this, hold the ball. I mean, we can coach and guide, but at the end of the day, like, what we really need to do is let them explore and wander and maintain the left and right limit. That metaphor and the ship metaphor, it always sticks with me. I have a unique situation. So our family is a mixed family. My wife, her late husband was killed in combat. You and I have talked about this before. And I met my son for the first time when he was 7 years old. Okay. And there's a lot of things that come with a 7-year-old boy that grew up without a dad in the wake of tragedy and loss and all of these emotions. You got to think how many years mom and grandma and all the family was processing these emotions right off the bat. And so because of that, there's a lot of fear wrapped up in it. And so as a dad, I struggled initially because, number one, I had never had kids before, ever. I had no idea what I was doing. And here's a 7-year-old who in my mind is a little boy, and it's my obligation to take out into the world and start making into a man. And I was at such a deficit initially because I had no established trust, right? When you have a kid, generally from a young age, a baby, a toddler, there is this inherent belief that you have their best interest in mind, right? And so him and I were friends. We had a great relationship, but there's always this hesitation of, are you going to put me in a situation that I'm not going to like, that is going to cause me harm? And so I had no tools to navigate that. My brain was like, nope, I'm just going to plow right through this, right? If I tell you to do something, you're just going to do it, because if I tell you to do it long enough, eventually there's going to be enough trust built that you're going to start to trust me. Well, he's 12 years old, soon to be 13. It took me way too long for me to figure out that every kid has a different personality type, and establishing that trust up front is more important than, this is what men do, don't ask me why, I'm not going to explain it to you. So I worked from a large deficit, and I really took for granted that initial relationship of, I have his best interest in mind. And I will tell you, having a son and coming into his life at a unique time has been a real gift. But now I'm at a point where I sometimes feel fearful because I see that every year he gets a little bit older. He's developing relationships with his friends. And it used to be, hey, I'm going to go do this thing. And whether or not I wanted him to come with me, he was there. Oh, I'm coming. I want to come with you. He was just there, just following me around. And now I'm at a point where he's soon to be 13. He's starting to live his own life. And I say, hey, I'm going to go do this thing. You want to come with me? And he thinks about it. And sometimes it's a yes, and more it's a no right now. And dude, that is like ripping me up. And the reason that you and I got connected is because I'm looking ahead at the relationship and I'm like, okay, my ultimate win to being a dad is having my son at a place where I can send him off into the world with complete confidence that he is, well equipped to be productive, handle situations, make good choices. But if I could sprinkle some whipped cream and cherries on top of that, him and I grow into becoming best friends. Like my best friend in the world is my son, my future adult son. Right now, we have a good relationship and we're friends, but I'm dad first. If I could just define what winning looks like as a parent, it's a productive child who is my best friend in the future. And there's this part of me that's like scarcity minded when he turns me down of like, nah, I'm going to pass on hanging out with dad because I'm going to go hang out with my friends. Now, I understand it's good. And I've been in his place before, but how do we navigate that?
So the question is, how do we navigate that sensation of our kids are starting to pull away and do their own?
Yeah.
The first thing is, like you, Tim, identified for yourself is, okay, I've got an emotion that's going on within me. I feel sad, scared, whatever it is, and just being with that and owning it and knowing that that's okay and that's normal. That's the first thing. I mean, that's a whole podcast to itself, is like owning our emotions and not trying to just deny them and push away. And the other thing, teenagers grow so fast, not just physically. My son was scrawny, 110 pounds a year ago. And now he's 5'11", 160 pounds, way bigger than I am, just like in a year, right? They're growing so fast physically, but also their mental and intellectual abilities are growing so fast. As we're trying to connect with anybody, we need to know where they're at and what their needs are. So if the desire is to have a stronger connection with your teenager, we've got to identify the things that are most important to them and make sure that we're really leaning in and listening in the moments that we have with them. So one thing I can tell you is there are very few folks in the world that are truly, really good listeners. If we can be that person for our kids, you'll always have a spot in their roster.
Yeah, I mean, that's a solid point. I want to talk about the retreat because it was so impactful to my relationship. We just got back from really a 3-day retreat in Bend, Oregon. And this retreat was really fun. It was me and my son and a couple other dads, you and your son. We had a camp trip. We went river rafting. We played paintball. We went for an early morning hike. We got up at 3 a.m. on the last day. And I want to talk about how that retreat went and the coaching sessions involved with it and how meaningful they were to my son and I and our communication. And while we were talking and debriefing the weekend, he told me, Dad, that was like the best weekend of my life, like the number one weekend I can ever remember having. And that memory is going to be in his brain when he's 60 years old. He's going to look back and think about that adventure we went on together. It was so meaningful that's when I was like, Thomas, you got to come on the podcast. Let's talk about what you're doing, what these retreats are, and how you're developing these relationships and this leadership and identifying your leadership style. So let's talk about this retreat. I want to talk about the concepts, how you integrated coaching, how we had sessions that coincided with adventures, and we used the adventure to reinforce the coaching sessions. Let's dig in.
Let's go. One of the big things I heard, Tim, that you kind of dropping into is the connection between the adventures and the curriculum. We can go on a journey, and a journey we go somewhere and we come back and we're the same person. Or we can go on an odyssey. And an odyssey, we go through our process and we come back as somebody new. And that's really the experience that I want everybody to be able to have. And so through this, if you go rafting and you just kind of go through and you watch the scenery and you hear about the history of the area, That's the traditional American vacation. And with this program, we go deeper into what can the river teach us about life, and how can we take lessons from dropping off into an eddy and recovering and making sure we've got all of our supplies together. It's a big question because there's so much during the retreat. I can't do it justice in a short period, but the lessons are connected into the curriculum in a way that the kids are going to remember a lot more clearly, because there's a reference point. Like, oh yeah, when I was playing paintball and I was scared, but I went out and went to pull the flag anyway. That's the connection.
So let me just give a couple examples of highlights of the trip. Okay. So we went river rafting the first day. We checked in, we went river rafting. All right. And while we were rafting, we talked a lot about energy flow, and we were identifying where the current is the strongest. We were identifying boils in the river. We were identifying back currents, and we were pointing out, listen, when should you go with the current? Okay, this is what it feels like when you go with the current. Look how fast you can go. But there's times that you could use the current to steer. There's times where you need to go against the current. There's other times where we need to identify eddies in the river and pull off and seek solace and rest and refit and recoup before we get back into the river. And if you go against the current when you need to go with the current, for example, if you're fighting that energy, number one, you're going to burn out. But number two, there were instances where the river was going to flip the boat, drag the boat under. And it's just a simple, subtle understanding of energy flow. And as boys mature into men and they grow into men, it was a great representation of a later coaching session that we had as, you're entering this phase of explosive growth. And you need to identify the energy potential you have and how to use it, and when it can work against you, when it can work for you, how to use eddies in your life. We went paintballing, okay? And paintballing was a really great representation of a couple things. Number one, one of the follow-up coaching sessions that came from paintball was just an unapologetic highlight of it's okay to identify with your masculine traits, to want to win, to want to be aggressive. I think society tells us, to curb that a lot today. And so not only reinforcing no, you guys, this is natural in you and we should nurture this and foster this because it makes the world better, but also risk versus reward, right? Young men, they take a lot of excessive risk and they get lit up. And what happens in paintball, if you run out into the open full force, everybody's shooting you and it hurts and it's instant feedback. But conversely, if you play it safe and you hang back and you're not watching the battlefield develop and you're not being dynamic, you're going to get shot way more often because you can't cover yourself and you don't know what's going around. You have no awareness of surroundings. And so what's the subtle sweet spot of being aggressive, but not overly aggressive? And on the third day, we woke up at 3 a.m., right? Destination unknown. We didn't really know what we were doing. And we embarked on a hike, a hike probably more rigorous than some of the boys had ever been on, I would imagine. And you highlighted at the top the change of who we are at the sunrise, right? We sat in silence and we journaled and you made sure that everybody looked around, looked at their surroundings. You wanted them to identify a target they're working towards on that climb. And on the way down, you pointed out, look how much the scenery changed once we shine light on our surroundings. Look at the colors pop in the rocks. And, you used it as a metaphor of life in their journey, right? Of how much more you could see and how much more fruitful things could be when you illuminate and shine light on this destination, this target that you're trying to reach. And so for us, it was really helpful because it was the first time that my son and I engaged in, similar type coaching and mastermind conversations that you and I go partake in. It's something that I've always wanted to share with my son. Yeah. I think there's always a little bit of confusion of how do I break into this with my 12-year-old? And the way that this trip worked with camping and dads and these integration of outings, it was a perfect opportunity to highlight these mastermind conversations and not only show them, but get them involved. We were asking them about their own masculinity, about their role in society, about what their goals were. And they were treated as peers. So they sat around the fire as men for the first time, or maybe the first time, with dads conversing as peers. And it was just so powerful, just on a conversation level. And, you incorporate these retreats. You have these retreats every year, and there's different retreats. You just got back from a Breckenridge retreat. You were mountain biking, and I just wanted to bring it up because it was such a powerful lesson and dynamic in my relationship with my son. I thought that other people could absolutely benefit from the same thing. And I, anything that I think is good, I always want to bring to the world. And so I wanted to talk about those retreats and how impactful they were. And I don't know if there's a bigger win than having your 12-year-old tell you that was the best weekend of his life, at least for me anyways.
Thank you for sharing. It's honored to have you there. And to be honest, I think a huge part of the success of these retreats is the energy that the dads come in. And like yourself and the other dads that came to this one was like, hey, I'm coming with the energy that I want to grow myself. And that energy we bring in as dads, I want to grow myself. It makes it so much easier for the kids to say the same thing as I want to grow myself. If we're putting that pressure on like, hey, do you see this lesson? Do you get it? It's taking the energy, and now the energy is like pressing into your relationship instead of side by side and flowing.
It's leadership by example. And, to close out this point, you talked about initially in the call where you were reaching a relationship with your son. You're leading this dad mentorship program, and you have a relationship that's deteriorating. Son doesn't want to be around. Charles doesn't want to be around, wants to move with his mom. Yeah. You were doing your best at that moment. You were growing a business, doing what you needed to do. You're doing your quote unquote best to provide for the family. But sometimes your best isn't good enough. Sometimes we have to do as men what is required of us, not what is our best. Sometimes we have to kill the old version of ourselves and do what is required, not what the old version's best is. And you highlighted that. You killed the old version of yourself. You took the leap. You went out and embarked on this journey because you identified your priorities and did what you had to do. And I think that is commendable and extraordinary. So you're working on this new thing. You were telling me about identifying leadership personality types. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So there are 3 personality styles. There are 2 extremes and there's a spot in the middle. The first one is, which was natural for me. And this is a trap that I fell into until I learned how to rewire myself and write a new story as a dad. I call it the admiral archetype. And the admiral archetype is very disciplined, in control of himself, in control of his environment. Every dad wants the best for their kids. It's just the path of getting there is different. The admiral often, the ability to connect with his son or his daughter or even his wife is often the limiting factor in his ability to lead them to where he wants them to go. He knows how to get himself to where he wants, but he's struggling to get his family to follow his lead and lean into his leadership. So that's one archetype. The other archetype is a guardian. And the guardian also has a tremendous amount of love for his kids, but does it in a different way. Naturally, they lean more into the relationships. It's very easy for him to take his shoes off on the beach and run and play with his kids and be present and enjoy those moments. And his struggle comes when does he say no? When does he say like, hey, my kid wants to go out for ice cream and I want to have a great connection with them. And how do I lead them in a way where I know maybe ice cream's not the best thing. Maybe it'd be better if we did something else more healthy for our body. But they're struggling to say, like, all right, how do I hold that frame and say, this is the direction that we're going? And it's not just about what the kids want, but it's about what you know as your heart as a leader of where you want to guide them. So the quiz kind of takes you through that journey of identifying who you are as a leader, hopefully illuminating some strengths and also giving you some solutions to how to leverage your strengths, but also how to fill in your weaknesses. Go to dadswholead.com. It's totally free. You take the quiz, learn your personality and leadership style.
This is important because clarity is the key to execution, right? Like you have to be clear on not only your strengths, but also your deficiencies if you're ever going to make it to your objective. And oftentimes you need to identify who you are to even identify an objective that you're shooting for or a destination. So it's very, very important. I would encourage everybody to take this test, identify their personality type, their leadership style and ability, and reach out. Thomas is a wealth of knowledge. He's helped my relationship with my son. It's been a blessing getting to know him. I'm going to include all of his information in the show notes below. I'd encourage you, scroll down there, click through it, get connected, take the quiz, reach out to Thomas for additional resources, or if you want to find out about, upcoming retreats. He also runs a coaching program. He does a coaching and mentorship program for dads. So I wouldn't talk about it if I didn't believe in it and if it didn't help me and my son. And And so I just wanted to share the knowledge and pass it on. Thomas, anything else you'd like to say before we close out, where people can get a hold of you, find out more information?
Yeah, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm on Instagram and Facebook. If you're a dad and you're at that point where you feel your kids starting to pull away from your leadership, the one thing I'll say is hold the line and hold your faith and confidence in yourself. You are the leader of your home, and you can possess full ownership of the outcome of the results that you have in your relationship with your son or your daughter. And that's the biggest key to success, not just with our relationships, but with anything, is having the faith and confidence in ourselves that we are in control and we are in the driver's seat.
Well, brother, it's been an honor having you on the show, and just a blast getting to know you and being a part of your program and your retreats. And I look forward to more. I think this is just the beginning for us and our relationship, and I'm fortunate to know you, and I'm here to cheer you on as you continue to win and grow and help nurture dads and ultimately our communities. So thank you, Thomas. To all you listening out there, thank you for sticking around, and we will catch you next week. Catch you on the flip side.